Well, I'll hand it right over to Steve and Pamela to take us through the 2021 Burlington-Edison School District Healthy Use Survey data results, specifically looking at some of the substance abuse questions.
Okay, yeah, happy to present this information. So just looking at the agenda, the way we'll go through this is I just want to give some background data and some things to think about in our perspective. And then as we actually get into the data, I'm going to turn it over to Pamela, who has just been super helpful in this, and I think done an amazing job going through creating these slides. I think everybody will agree with me when we get to the end. Some real fascinating data that we're going to share out. And then we'll come back together and I'll wrap it up, and we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers and maybe share out some of your thoughts as we move forward. Some things to consider. First off, the Healthy Use Survey is a giant of a survey. There's close to 150 questions. There's 3 different types of surveys that are given out. So if we were to go through all of the questions and all of the responses, we'd be here probably until May 20th, and then I'd have to miss the peer-to-peer training. So we just kind of picked out some key things to look at, and we'll go from there. So if anybody really wants to dig into the heart of the survey, feel free to let me know, and I'll get that information out to you. So if we want to go ahead and move forward, there we go. The survey was administered this fall in October, and what I want you to be able to think about right now is it was given to 6th graders, 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders. So try to get yourself in that mindset and think about what was happening in the lives of 6th graders, 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders. Take a moment just to think about that. One of the things that I came up with is in our district, what was happening is in October, they were just 1 month into a return to fully in-person learning. Prior to that, it had been either completely remote or hybrid, combination of in-person and remote. Some districts were just all remote. Some were all hybrid. So think about what that might seem like. The other thing that struck me was it's a return for the first time in over a year to normal extracurricular activities. In October, kids were going to football practice. They were going to volleyball practice, cross-country practice. They were going to band practice, concert, choir practices. They were participating for the first time in well over a year, normal school-age kid activities. So if anybody wants to share, if we just take 30 seconds, pop on, unmute yourself, and chime in with what you think a typical 6th, 8th, 10th, or 12th grader might be thinking. What's the mindset at that point? Okay, fair enough. We'll move right along. I told you what I think, that the mindset has to be at that point, pure joy and excitement for most kids that were in school taking that survey. The big one is they were face-to-face with their friends. They were sitting in the cafeteria having lunch with their friends. They were talking in 3-dimension. They weren't sitting in front of a screen. So they were able to engage in learning for the first time in well over a year. And for a lot of kids, that extracurricular activities was just a tremendous sigh of relief. I think the mindset of a kid taking this was excitement and joy. And so think about moving forward. I know we talk a lot about the anxiety and depression and mental health of kids, and absolutely that is at the forefront, and it should be of everyone's mind. But the survey results for us just don't bear that out. So we have to be real cautious with that. When you look at the Healthy Use Survey website, it issued a press release that talked about how the survey shows mental health challenges. In reality, for our district, mental health challenges were a lot more significant as recent as 2018. and we can go back even further. As an example, this year was 38% of 10th graders reported feeling sad or hopeless over the past 12 months. Well, in 2018, that number was 32%, so not a significant difference there. For us, there's even an 8-point difference in suicide attempts, right? The Healthy Youth Survey state average is 20% of 10th graders reported they seriously considered attempting suicide. For us, it was 15%. 16% of 10th graders actually made a suicide plan, state average. For us, it was 3.4%. So the mental health numbers don't really bear that out, but I think that's probably has something to do with the our school being full-time and full-time extracurricular activities. Just my thoughts there. You want to pull ahead to the next one? And then a couple of things to give thought to as we move into the actual data. So you can see on the screen the number of valid responses and what the participation rate, and this is for our school district in our grades. And those participation rates are pretty comparable to all the previous ones. And we can go back even further than 2014, but they're pretty standard and pretty consistent. The 12th grader one at 62%. Healthy Youth Survey folks caution us anything below 70 to maybe it is representative, maybe it isn't, but over 70% is generally pretty representative of your student body. The other things to think about is traditionally Healthy Youth Survey is given every 2 years in grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. Okay, so this wasn't done last year when it was scheduled to because of the pandemic. Everything was shut down and school was completely remote. So they thought they would postpone it until most schools were back in person. So this is the first time that this group actually ever even saw the Healthy Youth Survey. So we can't really track the data moving forward as cohort groups because the people that took this, we don't have any prior data. So to say that 2 years ago, 6th graders are now 8th graders, we can't do that because the data doesn't line up. So to get a true reflection of these folks that took it, we got to wait 2 years to get an actual reflection of the cohorts moving forward. The other thing that we have to be cautious of is this year was a switch to online version only. So in the past, the Healthy Youth Survey used to be done on paper and pencil. And this time they switched it to completely online. That's important because had it been done last year, the folks down at the Healthy Youth Survey had planned to do a pretty extensive survey to determine the effects of switching from paper to online. How would it affect student responses? They chose not to do that study, so we don't know if there's a real effect or not, okay? We can't also really compare. I know, Rich, you've seen some of these presentations that I've done in the past. We're not going to compare our numbers to the Skagit County numbers or ESD 189's numbers or even the state numbers a whole lot, just because all school districts may have been at different stages of learning at that time. Some may have been completely online, some may have been hybrid, some may have been in person. So it's really not necessarily a fair comparison. And again, we don't know what kids' thought processes were at this point. So that's just not a fair comparison. So we want to keep that kind of cautionary tale in the back of our heads as we think through this. So with that, I think, Pamela, and feel free to sing like you did for Barry Manilow as you go through this if you want to. And at any time, if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in. I'm sorry I haven't monitored the chat log much, but we'll have an opportunity to look at that later. So Pamela, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
So we're going to start by talking about usage, and the focus on these slides is going to be non-use. This is the area in the study where they have kind of the most information across all of the different substances that that youth may be using. So we'll talk about alcohol, vaping, marijuana, tobacco, and prescription drugs. The first graph that I want to show you is around no past use in the last 30 days for alcohol. And the question is at the bottom of this graph. It says, during the past 30 days, on how many days did you drink a glass, can, or bottle of alcohol? And those are the responses from 2014 through to 2021. And I went ahead and I put, I'm a little frustrated. I'm not getting my notes to show up here. If you can give me just a moment, I want to see if I can fix that. I may be out of luck. I might have to wing it here. I went ahead and put the numbers in for 2021 just to ground you a little bit on where people are at. One of the things that comes up with the Healthy Youth Survey is margins of error. And a margin of error is just the amount of statistical variability that there might be around what we call a point estimate. So for example, looking at 12th graders in 2021, that 85% is a point estimate of the portion of 12th graders who reported no use in the past 30 days. Now, what we know is that, let's see here.
Pamela, if you change your PowerPoint view back to...
It just popped up. It just popped
Okay.
up. So I think I've got it. Is everything working on your end?
Yes.
Okay. The margin of error for that point estimate is 5.4%, which means that that 85% may be as high as 90.4%, or it may be as low as under 80%. We can't know for sure. It varies depending on how many people respond to the question, how consistent their answers are. And so for this particular one, I wouldn't be able to conclusively say that 12th graders and 10th graders are statistically different. At the same time, if you look at this pattern of 6th grade through 12th grade use, it makes sense intuitively. We would expect use to increase as kids get older. What's interesting is that we see this huge shift in the positive direction of no use between 2018 and 2021. Let's see, I think that's all I wanted to say about that one. And I want to encourage you, Liz promised to keep an eye out for raised hands and questions in the chat. Feel free to interrupt and ask questions if anything I say is confusing to you, or if you want clarification or you want to make an observation. This does not need to be formal at all. See here. I haven't had to do a PowerPoint presentation in a long time, so I'm a little rusty. Okay, so the next question is, during the past 30 days, for how many days did you use an electronic cigarette, also called E-Cigs, Juul, or vape pens? This question was not asked of 6th graders in 2014, but has been since 2016. Again, the focus is on no use. And I do want to note, I forgot to mention with the last slide that, oh, this is really interesting. Okay, that the scale starts at 60% at the bottom of the screen. This is not a 0 to 100 scale. It's not considered a best practice to start at 60%, but I wanted you to be able to see the variability pretty clearly. And so I chose to do that. All of the slides in this section will be from 60 to 100%. So you won't be jumping around in terms of scales. You can see sort of comparability from slide to slide. Let's see. My goodness. I see what's
If I could
happening.
jump in right quick and just maybe just remind everybody that, and particularly when we're looking at the differences from 2018 to 2021, we're going to see that upward trend. But just to remind ourselves what was going on between 18 and 21, right? And try to keep that mindset as we think, wow, what's happening here? What's going on in the mindset of a 6, 8, 10, and 12 between that time? Okay, thank you.
For sure. Thanks, Steve. I think that probably the most interesting finding on this graph is what's going on with 10th graders. And that you can see that they track with the 6th and 8th graders a little more closely in the first 2 years of the study and more closely with the 12th graders in the last 2 years of the study. I wanted to let you know that the margin of error on this is 5% for the 10th graders and 9% for the 12th graders. So there's a lot of what statistically we call noise in these data. I'll be very interested to see what the 2023 data show, so we can see if that 10th grade line doesn't trend out in one direction or another, closer to the 8th graders or closer to the 12th graders.
So this is showing that there are more kids who did not vape in the last 30 days. So
Correct.
An increase of youth who did not use. I think that's great news, but keeping in mind, that it's a different cohort, and like Steve said, there could have been a lot of euphoria in October, being able to be in person and have some normal experience.
I also think it's interesting that the 8th graders have been so steady over this entire 8-year time span. They're consistently in the mid 90s. So that's an interesting finding also. Let's see. Okay. So during the last 30 days, on how many days did you use marijuana or hashish? These are the findings, again, starting at 60%. The 2021 results are really unusual, particularly those 10th graders dropping down to about the level of the 12th graders once you consider the margin of error. There's a lot of continuity from 2014 to 2016 and more divergence in 2018, and then this kind of shift. And that may be a cohort effect. We're not sure, of course. Still, if you look at it, we're talking about a relatively low number of students, or a high number of students who are not using marijuana. Oopsie, sorry. So in the past 30 days, they asked on how many days did you smoke cigarettes? Please note that with this tobacco item, they are not talking about chewing tobacco or other types of tobacco, just smoking cigarettes. Notice that there's a lot less fluctuation on this one than on the other graphs. Again, a lot of continuity among the grades, particularly in 2014-16. Things start to diverge in 2018, and then 2021. You see a kind of a trend for the 12th graders. Still, they're only at 89%. They're at 89, a remarkable 89% of non-use, compared to the other 3 grades, which tend to cluster together. So as somebody who's not in your field, who doesn't look at substance use among youth very often, I find this a really interesting graphic, and I'm really curious about what's going on with attitudes about tobacco. Think about what it was like when I was growing up. It's very different kinds of patterns.
Oh, I was wondering if I could chime something in here.
Yeah.
I think that the reason we see the use of cigarettes a lot lower than like e-cigarettes or something is because the e-cigarettes are a lot easier to hide. You can smell smoke on a person, but it's a lot harder to hide the smell of the e-cigs.
So it sounds like your sense is that people are substituting e-cigs for tobacco. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Thank you. There we go. The last substance that we're looking at is prescription drugs. And the question read, during the past 30 days, for how many days did you use prescription drugs not prescribed to you? And again, you can see this is a relatively, it's a very high non-use pattern among all the grades, with a tremendous amount of convergence in 2021. And this was not asked of 6th graders at all in any of the years. Mm. Finally, I thought it might be interesting to look at all of the substances side by side for all of the grades just for 2021, so that you can see relative comparisons in a different format. Starting on the right-hand side, if you look at prescription drugs, you can see, again, there's a lot of coherence in use patterns among the different grades. With marijuana, you see kind of this clustering of the lower grades and the higher grades. Vaping and alcohol tend to have a little bit of a stair-step pattern going on. So decreases in non-use as kids age. And then with tobacco, a lot of coherence in the younger grades, with 12th graders kind of standing out as a little bit different. Okay. The second section is about perception. And we're going to talk about perception from a couple of different angles. There's several questions. There's a lot of questions about perception of risk. I'm going to start by talking about the two substances where kids were asked to report on how risky vaping is and how risky using prescription drugs is. And then we're going to talk a little bit about perception of peers and perceptions of parents, which were the two groups that were asked for, or asked of. So the first question was, how much do you think people risk harming themselves if they use electronic cigarettes, also called e-cigs or vape pens, regularly? And by regularly, they clarified they mean almost daily. And this shows the results from 2018 and 21, which were the only 2 years that this question was asked. And so this is the youth's report of how much they think people in general, or they might think, how much would I be hurting myself if I used e-cigarettes or vape pens regularly? One of the things that I find striking about this is the lack of change between the 2 years. 10th graders and 12th graders are pretty close together, as we saw in the other graphics. 8th graders, it's a little higher. This is the percent of kids who said that they thought there was a great risk. And you'll notice that the scale has changed on this. I went from 0 to 90. So fewer than 50% of youth feel that vaping presents a great risk, even with almost daily use. The second question was about the same issue. How much do you think people risk harming themselves if they use prescription drugs that are not prescribed to them? This was asked in 3 years, 2016, 18, and 21, and of 3 grades. So one of the things that is encouraging about this is you can see the stair-step pattern from year to year. In all 3 of the grades, there's been an increase of perception that use of prescription drugs that aren't prescribed to you presents a great risk. So those were the only 2 questions that were asked around personal risk. And this is about peer and parental disapproval around marijuana, prescription drugs, and tobacco. The first graph, and note that we start at 30% on the axis on the left, is about how wrong people feel their friends would feel it would be for you to use marijuana. So that's a little bit of a complex question. They're asking them about their friends' perceptions for themselves. And this is the percent of kids who said they thought their friends would think it was very wrong for them to use marijuana. What I notice on this graphic is that 8th graders are very consistently perceiving their friends to think it would be very wrong for them to use marijuana. Right around 70% agree with that statement or stated that level of risk from their friends. The 10th graders, again, give us a lot of variability. from 2014 to 16, the reported perceived risk, peer disapproval, jumped and then declined, and now it's back up above 50% again. 12th graders are much more steady, no more than 40%, right around the mid to upper 30s, believe that their peers would find it very wrong for them to use marijuana. The second graph is around prescription drugs. Again, the same phrasing. How wrong do your friends feel it would be for you to use prescription drugs not prescribed to you? And notice that this jumps well above the 50% mark. Again, 8th graders are at the top for most of it. 10th graders have a little bit of variability. The 12th graders jumped from just over 50% to almost 70% in 2018 to under 60% in 2021. And I'll let you know that on this question, because of the number of students that were asked these questions, as Steve mentioned, there were several versions of the test survey. The margin of error is around 9 to 12% per each. So while there is a lot of wide variability, those margins of error, I just want to caution you to think of it as sort of soft points. Like imagine there's a lot of cotton padding around each of those little nodes. That the variability is likely not quite that strong, but there's still some variability among the groups. Oopsie. Oh, okay. So this is parental disapproval. I fooled myself there. The question is, how wrong do your parents feel it would be for you to use prescription drugs not prescribed to you? And you can see that all of the grades are very high on this mark. Again, this is the percent whose parents would say it was very wrong, with not a lot of distinguishability among the grades and across time. We're back to peer disapproval, and this one is of tobacco. How wrong do your friends feel it would be for you to use tobacco? From 2014 to 2021. Again, we see the 8th graders being fairly steady. The 10th graders are less variable than they have been on some of the other items, and the 12th graders are fairly steady. So there hasn't been a tremendous amount of change over time on this one, and it is stair-stacked, just as you'd expect, with the 8th graders having more sense of peer disapproval than the 10th or the 12th graders. Oh, that was the end of it. Oh my gosh, that snuck up on me. So as Steve mentioned, there are 150 questions in this survey. This is just a portion, but you got to see the same questions looked at over time and by grade, which is a lot to digest. So I just encourage you to dig into the data on your own if you want to, and also I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Steve, it's your.
Yeah, it just so in thinking about these things, a couple of things that popped out to me that I hadn't given thought to before. In the one area about the difference between the perception of prescription drug use, prescription, and the vaping one, how people seem to understand, they get the prescription drug use as harmful, but not so much in the vaping. And it occurred to me, nobody is marketing prescription drug use to teens, but big tobacco, the vaping companies are, they're marketing it directly to them. And where do teens get their information from? They get it from a couple places. They get it from their friends, they get it from the internet, and they get it from school. Well, they weren't getting it from school all of last year. So I would think it occurs to me that the primary information that they was getting was probably pro-vape from the media, from the internet and the marketing that is out there for it. I don't know if that's true, but we will see, hopefully in 2 years, that number goes back up, hopefully. The other thing to think about is while our participation rate, again, was similar to past, we do know that our enrollment for Burlington-Edison School District was down roughly 250 students since prior to the pandemic. So I'm wondering, the kids that weren't taking this survey, who are those kids? Could they be kids that normally would report higher uses of different types of drugs, or and they've just been easier to disengage and drop out? Or were they the students that traditionally would report no use to extremely low use because they're more interested in academics, and maybe they transferred, or their parents transferred them to more well-established online schools over the last year because they thought that they would do a better job there. So it's tough to say the number of kids that didn't take it. How would they affect the survey? How would they affect the results? Just don't know that. But a couple of things that do jump out that are real big takeaways for me, and hopefully they're the same kind of takeaways that we'd like everybody else to see, is the one constant, no matter how far back we go, with our district, the overwhelming majority of our students are making good choices when it comes to drug use. The overwhelming majority are. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. The other big takeaway is the minority of students that are using, although the numbers look low and we can celebrate that, those numbers are actual real students. They're real people. So even if it's one student that is using illegal substances, that's, for me, that's one too many. And I hope everybody shares that sentiment as well. But that is a testament, our low numbers are a testament to the work that the coalition has done over the years in providing protective factors for our students in our community. There are questions in the Healthy Youth Survey that are directly related to community risk factors and protective factors. And traditionally, we score very high in protective factors. And again, that speaks to the work of the coalition, which hopefully gives everybody a reason to come back to the next meeting, and the next meeting, and the next meeting, and the next meeting, and all of those other good things that the work that people are doing. And I really appreciate that as somebody that sees the effects of it firsthand all too frequently. I appreciate the work that the coalition and everybody here does, because it certainly makes life easier for people like me that are seeing those negative effects all too often. So thank you for that. And I'm wondering if anybody else had anything that just jumped out. If you were thinking about the results as a 6th, 8th, 10th, or 12th grader, did it make any sense? Was there anything that surprised you? Was there anything that confirmed your thoughts? Is there any more information that you would like to look at maybe down the road at a future meeting or something? Is there anything else that we can do to kind of help you out? And is there anything that you can provide us in terms of thoughts about what we've gone over here?
Know that the Healthy Youth Survey has a variety of more questions. So we cherry picked these questions mostly because they were, immediately relevant to the coalition. As a Drug-Free Communities grant, we have to report on those items that Pamela just showed us. So we need to report those by August. So it made sense to focus in on those, but indeed there is more data there that we can look at, as Steve is suggesting, and we can look at things that are mental health related questions. And we probably could have added on another half hour to the presentation by just looking at some of the questions having to do with suicide, anxiety, depression, bullying, feeling safe at school type of questions. So there is that opportunity to look at those as well. And I'd also think about it. Are there other groups that we want to share this information with, that we can not only push out this recording, but to say, would it be beneficial to, visit the Kiwanis, visit the Rotary, and share this or similar information? Would it make sense to host something at the library for other parents to be able to hear? Who else among our schools do we want to share this information with? So I put those thoughts out there.
Steve, I had a question on like heroin and fentanyl. Are those considered prescription drugs, or are there separate questions on that?
There are separate questions related to opioid use, but Rich, as we saw in the previous presentations that we've gone years back, again, so minimal, not worth the discussion here.
In our area, or
Yeah.
our district, yeah.
Although I know where you're going with that, and we do have an increased use of fentanyl in our area, just not seeing it come work its way into the schools.
Okay, that's good. What about, can you pull any of the positive things that come from the community out to share with people from the survey?
I can do just that. If you can give me 1 second here. Let's see. I will scroll all the way down here. The Healthy Youth Survey sends me for our district a 250-page report, one for the entire district, and then one for each grade level, and then one for each school. So it's quite a bit that I'm scrolling through here to get to. But once I get there, I will tell you. Okay. All righty. So, okay, here we go. These are questions related to the community at large, right? So not just school or not the family environment. So question here is, if you wanted to get some beer, wine, or hard liquor, how easy would it be for you to get some? And the response rate, 6th grade is 75%, 8th grade 50%, 10th grade 40%, 12th grade 20%. So the number there is what you would expect to see. The older you get, the easier things are, right? Cigarettes, the same thing, very hard to get. 6th grade 80%, 8th grade 66%, 60% for 10th grade, 45% 12th grade. So the numbers, the perception, how easy is it, how hard is it? It's not at everybody's front door, it appears. Perceived availability of handguns. If you wanted to get a handgun, how easy would it be for you to get one? They don't ask 6th graders, but for very easy, 3% 8th grade say they could get one. 7% of 10th graders say it's easy to get, and 3% of 12th graders say it's easy to get a handgun. Low numbers, but still, if one kid has an easy time getting a handgun, I want to make sure I know who that kid is. These would be numbers about how wrong would most adults in your neighborhood or community think it was for kids your age to use marijuana. 83% of sixth graders report very wrong. That's a high number. How wrong would most adults in your neighborhood or community think it was for kids your age to smoke cigarettes? 85% of sixth graders say very wrong. The only numbers that really concern me are the number, and they always have, at least for the last 3 surveys, are the ones about police. If a kid drank some beer, wine, or hard liquor in your neighborhood or community, would they be caught by the police? Not many of them think so. Here's
Rich, sorry, Steve.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just going to interject that Rich, I really appreciate this question. And Steve, thank you for delivering this. I think, this is information, these, community information is what would help indeed BHCC in terms of what are we doing right? What should we shift on in terms of our activities? What can we pat ourselves on the back for? Where are these places that are good protections, but also where are the places where things are sort of falling down or falling apart, and that we need to look at and see if we need to bring in more partners or more conversations to try to, rebuild some protections around some of these issues.
I want to leave Rich with one last one here. This sums it up perfectly. The question is, I like my neighborhood and community. And they don't ask the sixth graders, but the eighth graders, 82% say yes. For 10th graders, it's 85%. And for 12th graders, it's 72%. Overwhelming majority of the kids like their neighborhood, Rich. They're probably your next door neighbor. So yeah. But to be perfectly honest, I haven't looked at each and every question throughout the whole thing. I mean, it's just a ton of stuff, but everything that I've seen, there's nothing that jumps off the page at me and says, oh my gosh, we have a crisis on our hands. Just not willing to go down that road yet. I'm pretty happy with the responses. But again, like I say, one number is one person.
Is it broken down by ethnic group?
It can be, yep. It can be.
I'd be interested in seeing that. I'll talk to you some other time.
Yeah, I can do that for you. Can also break it down male, female, break it down by income level, who they live with, all kinds of stuff. It's pretty entertaining stuff to get into.
Yeah. Thank you both so much, Steve and Pamela, for compiling all of this info for us and really contextualizing it as well. I think you have a really good perspective, Steve, that, puts it into the context for us. So I feel like we have a lot of interest in this. So I'm wondering if in the interest of time, we can wrap up our meeting today. But if you have more questions, reach out to Liz or I, and then we'll get back in touch with Steve and Pamela, and we'll see what else we can bring out of this survey for you. So please do reach out